Right in the heart of the Pentagon, my father, a decorated general, was unleashing his voice in front of a row of senior officers. 8 languages, he barked, and not a single one worth anything. The military doesn't have use for delicate scholars. My brother was posted right next to him, wearing a smirk like it had been stitched there. Neither of them knew that this so-called fragile scholar was on the verge of becoming their worst nightmare. I'm Claire Morgan. I'm 36 years old, serving as a captain in the United States Army Military Police Corps. And on this particular Thursday, I might as well have been invisible. Sitting in the 9th row in my dress uniform, I felt less like a proud representative of service and more like I was hiding inside armor, the immaculate creases and polished buttons the only things keeping me from unraveling. The Pentagon's auditorium was vast and imposing, built to remind you of the weight of the institution. Rows of officers in dark blue and gold filled the seats like a living tapestry of rank and history. But for me, the air wasn't ceremonial. It was thick, oppressive, carrying the kind of pressure you feel right before a lightning strike. From where I sat, I could see them in the front VIP section. My father, retired General William Morgan, a man carved from granite, discipline etched into every line of his face. Beside him was my older brother, Major David Morgan, the golden child who had marched straight from West Point into the fast lane of prestige, destined to carry on my father's formidable legacy. They were the shining stars of the Morgan family's military constellation. I was the faint, unremarkable speck caught in their gravity simply because of our shared last name. My father didn't glance my way once. He didn't have to. His presence pressed against my shoulders like a tangible weight, the unspoken judgment never letting up. He was there as a celebrated symbol of the Army's past. David was its bright promise for the future. And I, Captain Morgan, was there like a necessary prop, the last, slightly flawed puzzle piece needed to complete the picture of the perfect military family. Just breathe, I told myself, my hands in white gloves tightening in my lap. Keep quiet. Blend in. It was a skill I'd honed for most of my life. The ceremony dragged on. Medals pinned, speeches made. My attention locked on a loose thread dangling from the chair ahead of me, anything to keep my mind still. Then the master of ceremonies, a full-bird colonel with the kind of smooth voice they use for recruiting ads, stepped up to the podium. And now, he began, his words echoing in the high ceiling, we recognize an officer whose uncommon skills, though often unseen, have had a profound impact. For extraordinary linguistic expertise that, on multiple occasions, safeguarded American lives in high-risk negotiations. I felt it before I registered it, a ripple in the air. My father's shoulders went rigid. His already straight spine turned to steel. And then he did the unthinkable. He rose, not to applaud, not to excuse himself, but with the commanding snap of a man who ruled every space he entered. He stepped into the aisle, lifting his hand, not in greeting, but in a gesture that halted everything. The colonel's voice faltered, then cut off entirely. A hush spread across the hall, swallowing every cough and shuffle. My father's voice, the same battlefield thunder that had moved battalions, rolled through the room's pristine sound system. I need to say this, he boomed, sweeping his gaze over the stunned audience. 8 languages, and they're useless. The gasp that rose seemed to pull the oxygen out of the air. The Army needs fighters, he went on, stabbing a finger upward. Men who can pull a trigger, not soft-handed academics. Dozens of heads turned, first to him, the icon of strength, then to the colonel, frozen at the podium. And then, inevitably, the search began. I felt the shift when their eyes found me, the general's daughter, the supposed scholar. David stayed beside our father, saying nothing. His face showed no shame, no conflict, only a slow curl of satisfaction tugging at his mouth. It was the look of someone savoring a win. The ground didn't just shift beneath me, it shuddered. My ears rang so sharply it drowned the murmurs building around me. Heat surged over my face, down my neck, flooding my body in a single wave of humiliation. I felt stripped bare in front of peers, superiors, subordinates, and my own family held the blade. Then, cutting through the tension like a knife, came another voice. Calm, steady, commanding without needing volume. General Morgan. It was General Shepard, the four-star head of Army CID, rising from the front row and striding toward the stage. His reputation wasn't built on bluster, but on razor-sharp intellect. His eyes locked on my father, unflinching, then found me across the sea of uniforms. "Bring Captain Morgan up here," he said, each word leaving no room for debate. "We need whisper." The silence that followed was different, heavier, charged with sudden respect. "Whisper," someone murmured just behind me. My legs felt weighted. Somehow, my body carried me upright. One step, then another, then something extraordinary. An officer in the third row rose to attention. Then another. And another. Like a silent wave sweeping across the hall, every single person rose. Lieutenants, captains, colonels, even the other generals in the VIP section. They stood rigid, saluting in absolute silence. And it wasn't for my father. It was for me. I kept my eyes locked on General Shepard as I moved forward. Passing my brother, I saw the smug curve on his mouth freeze, twisting into something ugly and uncertain. Then I walked by my father. He was still planted in the aisle, posture unyielding, but his face had gone ghostly pale. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't anger or disappointment. It was raw, unfiltered shock. I didn't look away. I wanted that moment seared into my memory, his authority stripped away, his certainty cracked. I walked toward the man who called me Whisper, leaving the splinters of my family behind. The storm had finally broken. That expression, drained, defeated, should have felt like a victory. But as I stood on the stage with the auditorium's respectful silence pressing in on me, there was no surge of triumph. Instead, the look in his eyes unlocked a door I'd kept locked for nearly 2 decades. The polished floor of the Pentagon faded. Suddenly, I was 17 again, my feet on the cold linoleum of our modest base housing at Fort Carson, Colorado. Thanksgiving. Our small Army-issued duplex smelled like a Norman Rockwell painting, turkey slow roasting in the oven, my mother's pumpkin pie cooling on the counter, cinnamon and nutmeg in the air. It should have been warm, full of chatter and laughter. But in the Morgan household, warmth came in careful, measured doses. The air was brittle with unspoken rules. All day, I'd kept my secret close, a thick cream-colored envelope that felt like a passport to another life. It was my acceptance letter to Columbia University, offering me a full scholarship for their linguistics program. Not just an acceptance, an escape. My dream, written in elegant navy ink. I'd clutched it to my chest, my pulse dancing with a mix of nerves and joy, waiting for the perfect opening. Tonight would be the night I earned even a fraction of the approval that came so effortlessly to my brother. The dining table was crowded with aunts and uncles in their best clothes, all orbiting the gravitational pull of my father. He sat at the head like a king at court, and next to him was the crown prince, my brother David, home for the holiday from his first year at West Point. Every conversation revolved around him. Stories flowed about his training, the respect he'd earned from peers, the glowing reports from his commanding officers. He absorbed it all with the polished humility of someone who'd rehearsed it for years. I stayed quiet, picking at my green beans, feeling my own light shrink until I was nothing more than a shadow at my family's table. Finally, as dessert plates were being handed around, I saw my moment. My fingers trembled as I pulled the envelope from my dress pocket. My voice barely made it across the table. "Dad, I have something." I slid the letter toward him. He glanced at the Columbia crest without the slightest flicker of interest, then set it down, not in a clean space, but right beside the stripped carcass of the turkey, where bones and crumpled napkins were tossed. He didn't even break the seal. When he finally spoke, his tone was flat. "A scholarship for languages." The words dripped like a diagnosis. His eyes shifted to David, pride softening his features. Then he raised his voice so everyone could hear. "David is learning how to command a company of soldiers. That's the future. That's strength. What will you do with a piece of paper like that? Translate for vacationers while your brother protects the country." The room went still. My cheeks burned so hot it blurred my vision. I could feel my aunts and uncles' eyes on me, then darting away as they studied their plates. Across the table, David just shrugged, a perfect imitation of indifference. But I caught it, that faint glimmer of victory in his eyes. The final blow came when my father stood, wineglass in hand. "Everyone," he announced with booming pride, "a toast to Cadet David Morgan, the pride and the future of the Morgan family." A chorus of "Hear, hear," and "To David" rang out as glasses clinked. My name was never spoken. My dream sat there, bleeding into the paper from a careless streak of cranberry sauce. That night, in my room, I cried in silence, the kind of deep, shaking sobs you let out only when you finally understand your place in the world. I held on to the one thing that felt like armor, a worn, heavy French dictionary my mother had given me before she passed. She'd been a scholar, a woman who treasured words and history, a gentle heart in a house built on rigid military steel. She was the one who'd planted in me the belief that language had power, that it could bridge chasms no weapon could cross. "Claire," she'd tell me, "your mind is a weapon. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." But that night, as my tears bled into the thin pages of her gift, the truth sank in this house, under this roof, my weapon wasn't respected. It wasn't a source of strength. It was a target on my back. It didn't earn me value. It marked me as a disappointment. And then came the question, sharp as ice, cutting straight through the grief. Why? Why keep chasing the approval of a man who would never give it? Why keep playing a game that had been fixed from the start? The answer was as stark as it was simple. You don't. You walk away and build your own table. After graduating from Columbia, I didn't set foot back home. I went directly into the Army and chose the Military Police Corps, a career my father barely disguised his disdain for when it came to a woman. It was my quiet act of defiance. My first post was Fort Drum, New York. The winters there weren't just cold. They were a kind of cruelty. Snow from the lake effect buried the world in oppressive white, but it was the wind that cut deepest, tearing down from Canada, finding every seam in your jacket and every sliver of bare skin. That biting chill had nothing on the reception I got from my unit. I was the only female MP officer and the only one whose degree didn't come from a criminal justice track. I was the odd piece in the puzzle, and they made sure I felt it. They called me Columbia, with a sneer, or worse, the dictionary. At morning briefings, whenever I offered insights on how cultural subtleties or dialect shifts could influence an operation, I was met with rolled eyes, interruptions, or outright dismissal. My CO, an old-school captain who believed a strong arm solved everything, once told me flat out, "I need MPs who can bust down doors, not ones who can analyze some Persian poem." Their opinion shaped my assignments. Endless stacks of mind-numbing document translations, work they claimed a basic computer program could do better. My skill set wasn't just underused. It was treated like a bizarre, useless hobby. The isolation was constant, a shadow in that frozen landscape. But I wouldn't let it break me. The girl who once cried over a cranberry-stained envelope was gone. In her place stood a woman tempered by quiet fire. I didn't argue. I worked. I arrived before anyone else and stayed long after they left. I spent hours in a cramped, windowless office replaying interrogation recordings, not just for the words, but for the hesitations, the tonal shifts, the small grammatical quirks that hinted at deception. Out of my own pocket, I bought books on criminal psychology and nonverbal cues, building a private library no one else would bother to open. I created a system, a hybrid of linguistics, anthropology, and behavioral profiling that no one else in the building could replicate. It was a weapon only I possessed, and I honed it in silence. At night, with the wind howling against the barracks walls, I turned to a different kind of voice for comfort. Maya Angelou. Her writing was a salve for the day's small cuts. Her poem, Still I Rise, became my creed. I whispered it in the dark. You may write me down in history, with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. I didn't need their approval anymore. I just needed the chance. He didn't speak right away, but when his eyes met mine, the usual condescending smirk was gone. In its place was something rarer, the grudging respect of a man who'd underestimated me. It wasn't a medal. It wasn't a glowing commendation. But in the quiet of that moment, I knew I'd earned my first real victory, small, private, but hard won. That win at Fort Drum cracked open a door I didn't even know existed. My breakthrough in the Pashto case meant the method they'd once dismissed as eccentric suddenly had the Army's attention. I was summoned to a classified briefing with Army Cyber Command at Fort Meade, a place so far removed from drums, mud, and grit, it felt like another planet. Instead of barracks and motor pools, there were endless rows of humming servers, the air chilled and sterile, carrying the faint tang of ozone and heated electronics. The room was filled with sharp-eyed analysts who lived in a world of code, data streams, and encrypted firewalls, the guardians of secrets invisible to most. Standing there, my world of human nuance felt almost old-fashioned, like bringing a calligrapher to a conference on quantum computing. I delivered my presentation steadily, explaining my system, the cultural mapping, the paralinguistic analysis, the psychological profiles built from subtle word patterns. When I finished, the room responded with polite nods. They understood what I had done, but the house still felt like a foreign language to them. They saw the numbers. They didn't see the person. As the chairs scraped back and quiet conversations filled the room, one man stayed behind. A warrant officer 3, calm and still in a room built on restless energy. He waited until we were alone. "Captain Morgan," he began, his voice low, steady. "Elias Vance. Most people just call me Eli." No handshake, just a respectful nod. He wasn't looking at my slides or results. He was looking directly at me. "I've got a question about your process," he said. "You mentioned that you spotted the suspect's biggest lie from the way he reversed sentence structure while talking about logistics. That's not in any manual. That's art." For a heartbeat, I was speechless. 4 years, my work had been measured in black and white, intel gained or not gained, confession or no confession. This man didn't just see the outcome. He saw the craft, the instinct, the deliberate dance behind the science. "Thank you, warrant officer," I managed, my voice softer than I intended. "Eli," he corrected gently. "Would you have time for coffee? I'd like to hear more about your art." We ended up in a small diner just outside the gate, the kind with cracked red vinyl booths, coffee that tasted older than the building, and a waitress who called everyone Han. Over steaming mugs, we talked for hours. It was effortless, like water finding its path. I told him things I hadn't spoken about in years. My mother's old library, how she taught me that each language was a key to a different way of seeing and feeling the world. In return, he described the elegance of good code, how each line should be purposeful, like poetry, with nothing wasted. He explained how he could identify a hacker's voice in the patterns they left behind. A sloppy coder leaves messy footprints. An arrogant one writes in overly complex loops just to show off. A paranoid one builds layers of fake trails. It's all there. You just have to know how to listen. Our worlds are more alike than I thought, I told him with a real smile. You decode machines. I decode people. We're both just looking for the truth under the noise. In that moment, I felt something I'd never once felt with my own brother, kinship. With Eli, I wasn't the dictionary girl or the family disappointment. I was an equal, an expert, someone worth listening to. A few days later, an email from him appeared in my inbox. No long explanation, just a link to a Brené Brown TED Talk on vulnerability, followed by a single sentence. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and stepping into the arena anyway. He'd seen through the armor I wore every day. He'd seen the fear I kept hidden. And he understood the quiet war I fought inside. That Saturday night, I was buried under translation work in my office. The fluorescent lights hummed in the stillness, stacks of paper around me, the kind of silence that presses on your ribs. Around 9 o'clock, the door opened. Eli stood there holding a large pepperoni pizza and a can of Coke. "Thought you might need this," he said simply. No advice. No pity. Just a chair pulled up beside me, his own laptop open, working in companionable silence. It wasn't grand gestures. It was presence. It was the unspoken message. You're not alone. And for the first time, I understood something my family had never taught me. Blood doesn't define family. Sometimes family is simply the person who shows up when you're breaking. It's the person who sees your scars and doesn't flinch. The one who shows up on a lonely Saturday night with pizza, helping you rebuild yourself one bite at a time. Have you ever felt that? That unexpected grace when someone, sometimes not family by blood, offers more kindness and understanding than you've ever gotten from your own kin. That was Eli. He was the first member of a family I chose for myself. The years after Fort Drum passed in a quiet rhythm of progress. My friendship with Eli became an anchor I could trust. We were often stationed on different continents, but the bond forged over coffee and late-night conversations only grew stronger. Professionally, my reputation began to take root. No longer the dictionary girl, I was a recognized specialist. My work eventually sent me to Camp Eagle in Bosnia, tucked against the lush Versak Hills. I was tasked with mediating a fragile series of peace negotiations between rival local factions, a job that demanded every ounce of skill I had. It was exhausting, rewarding, and worlds away from my family's shadow. Then, one crisp December evening, as the first Christmas lights were starting to appear around the base, my satellite phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I hadn't seen in years. General William Morgan. My pulse slammed against my ribs, frantic and unsteady. He had never once called me during a deployment. Against my better judgment, a stubborn flicker of hope caught fire. Maybe he'd heard about my work here. Maybe he was proud. Maybe, just maybe, he wanted to make things right. I took a deep breath and answered. "Claire," he said, his voice carrying that same unshakable baritone of command that could transport me straight back to my childhood. "Your brother and I are here. We need to discuss something important." Then another voice slid through the line, smooth, calculated, coated in false warmth that made my skin crawl. "Hey, little sister," David said. "Word is you're making waves out there." For a heartbeat, I almost believed them. My hope flared. But it was a candle in a storm, and they blew it out in one breath. My father didn't waste time. "You're working with a private military contractor over there, Aegis Logistics." "Correct." "Yes," I replied carefully. "They handle some of our comms and logistical support." "Good." "I know their CEO personally. Solid man. There's a CID investigation headed their way. Allegations about equipment not meeting standards." The cold knot in my gut tightened. I already knew where this was going. "I need you to help steer the report," he continued matter of fact, as if asking me to pass the bread. "Soften it. Leave out a few of the more damaging details. Highlight their operational record. Consider it a favor for the family." The audacity of it robbed me of breath. He wasn't just asking me to bend the truth. He wanted me to commit a felony. To betray my oath, my unit, my own principles. All to protect a business ally. "Dad," I managed, my voice quiet but steady. "That's illegal. It violates the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's an ethics breach." The warmth in his tone, as false as it was, vanished. What replaced it was a familiar, cutting chill. "Don't lecture me about ethics, Claire," he snapped. "I served this country for 40 years. You're just a captain. This is how the world works. You help us, we help you. Don't forget who gave you the name on that uniform." A threat wrapped as a reminder. David's voice followed, dripping with condescending pity. "That's right, Claire. Don't be naive. This is your chance to prove you can be useful to the family. A real team player." And there it was, the truth, stripped of any disguise. To them, I wasn't an officer or a specialist with a unique skill set. I was a tool, a pawn to be moved or sacrificed for their gain. Everything I'd built, the victories, the respect I'd earned, the life I'd carved out for myself, meant nothing to them. But the anger that rose in me wasn't the helpless rage of my younger self. It was the steady, sharpened fury of a woman who knew her worth. The lessons from Eli, the strength forged in my solitude, the hard-won self-respect, it all formed a solid wall inside me. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate, before I spoke. "I will not." And before either of them could answer, I ended the call. My hand trembled as I set the phone down, but in my core, something settled. A door had been locked from my side. The line was dead, but the silence it left behind was deafening and freeing. For the first time in my life, I had not bent, not broken, not tried to appease. I had simply said no. I knew there would be consequences. I just didn't realize how quickly, or how brutally, they would arrive. 3 days later, I was leading the final reconciliation meeting between the two faction leaders. The location: a safe house on the outskirts of a small village. Drab concrete, chosen for anonymity. The air in the safe house felt like it could be chewed, thick, charged, and metallic on the tongue. My team was alert, every sense stretched taut. The comms from Aegis Logistics had been glitching all morning, static spitting into my earpiece. Then through the white noise, a voice slid in. Calm, measured, speaking Serbian. But it wasn't about the meeting. It was for me. Malacha, the voice whispered. Little whisperer. Tell me, is your father proud of you? The words froze my blood. It wasn't just my code name, Whisperer, known only to a handful of people. It was the question, a direct strike at the most private wound in my soul. A vulnerability only my family knew existed. Before I could even breathe, the world shattered. Glass erupted inward, the windows exploding in a deadly hail of shards. Splintered wood, choking smoke, and the roar of automatic gunfire crashed into the room all at once. The air turned acrid with the scent of cordite. Down. Return fire. I yelled, dragging both faction leaders to the floor while my soldiers scrambled to cover. Chaos detonated in every corner. My team fought hard, but we were pinned, trapped in a perfectly calculated kill zone. A round tore across my shoulder, white-hot agony searing through my uniform. Blood was already soaking the fabric, hot and slick against my arm. Through the blur of smoke, gunfire, and screams, clarity struck like a blade. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was a professional hit. They knew where we were. They knew when the meeting was. And they knew exactly how to unnerve me before they struck. Someone had fed them everything. And in my gut, I already knew who. The fight felt endless, but then, the thump of rotor blades. Rescue birds tore the smoke apart, driving the attackers back into the tree line. Two images burned into my mind as I lay on the floor catching my breath. My father's cold, unflinching stare, and David's smug, satisfied smile. This was their reply to my refusal. They hadn't just cut me out, they had tried to erase me. Back at Camp Eagle, medics cleaned and stitched the wound on my shoulder. The cut was neat, manageable, but the damage they'd done to my trust, to my very core, was far deeper. My own family had tried to have me killed. For a business contact. For influence. To punish me for saying no. The official report read like a bureaucrat's bedtime story. A breakdown in security protocols, an unfortunate choice of meeting location, an unavoidable tragedy. The solution was my reassignment for safety, a polite word for exile. They sent me to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The kind of posting designed to bury someone alive in paperwork until they disappeared entirely. That night, in the dim light of my temporary quarters, I stood before the mirror. My face was pale, my uniform crisp but stained by the fresh white bandage on my shoulder. But my eyes were alive, burning with something I hadn't allowed to surface until that moment. This wasn't fear anymore. It was something harder, cleaner. Have you ever been betrayed so completely that the fear burns out of you and leaves nothing but a blade of pure, unyielding resolve? I laid my hand over my chest, over the uniform they'd hoped would become my shroud, and I repeated my oath, not to them, but to myself. I, Claire Morgan, will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. My voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a battle cry. Because now I knew, my enemy wasn't across an ocean. My enemy shared my last name. They thought Fort Belvoir would be my quiet end. They gave me a colorless cubicle, endless forms to file, and a sentence to fade into nothing. They miscalculated. I didn't see a grave. I saw a staging ground. My first call was to Eli. Using a secure line, I reached him in Germany. Eli, it's Claire, I said, my voice low but urgent. I need your help. It's off the books. And it's dangerous. I told him everything. The call from my father and brother, the demand to falsify the report, my refusal, and the precision ambush 3 days later. Every ugly detail. Silence stretched across the line, heavy as lead. For a moment, I wondered if I had just dragged the one person I trusted into something too big, too dangerous. Then his voice came through, steady as bedrock. "Claire, I don't care if it's a 4-star general or the president himself. No one does that to an American soldier. No one." He paused. "Send me everything you've got. We're going to burn their system to the ground." Eli's loyalty was the single light cutting through my darkness, and it was all I needed. Our war began in the shadows. I started where I knew I was strongest, the language. One of my old Columbia professors had drilled it into me. Liars always trip over their own grammar. He used to say, "A flawed structure, a word out of place, a rhythm that doesn't fit, truth flows naturally. Lies stumble." My battlefield was hundreds of pages of Aegis Logistics performance reports. On the surface, they were flawless, too flawless. A sterile string of corporate jargon and vague, shiny phrases, operational efficiency, robust performance, minor logistical variance. Impressive-sounding words designed to say absolutely nothing. I cross-referenced every page against maintenance logs. Buried in the paperwork, I found them, tiny fractures. Equipment failures logged as operator error. Damaged parts reclassified as scheduled replacement. Perfect on paper, rotting in reality. While I dug through words, Eli waged his own war thousands of miles away. His target, the archived communications servers from Bosnia. As he predicted, the official record was a lie. The logs from the night of the ambush were marked corrupted due to system error, a sloppy, obvious attempt at a cover-up. But Eli was a phantom in the digital world. He didn't bother prying open the corrupted files. He examined the space around them, the server caches, the backup fragments, the shadow trails left behind. And there it was, hidden in the digital dust. Metadata showing an unauthorized access port had been opened and closed just hours before the attack. That port led directly to a private, encrypted server owned by Aegis Logistics. For 2 relentless weeks, we lived on black coffee and fury, speaking in encrypted bursts at all hours. Then, one night at 3 a.m., my phone vibrated. Eli's voice was a mix of triumph and controlled rage. "Claire, I've got him." He sent me a heavily encrypted audio file. My heart pounded as I decrypted it. It was a restored recording from the Aegis server, a phone call between their CEO and my brother, Major David Morgan, just 4 hours before I walked into that safe house. I pressed play. "My father's done his part," David's voice said, smooth and certain. "The pressure's on. Now it's your turn. Make sure the incident's convincing enough to shut her up for good." The CEO muttered something about risk. "It's not a risk," David snapped. "It's a solution." I froze. My breath caught. My world tilted. But Eli wasn't finished. He had found another file, a digital contract addendum approving a massive, no-oversight budget increase for Aegis Logistics. The authorization date was the day after the ambush. The signature at the bottom was clear. General William Morgan. I leaned back, staring at the damning proof glowing on my screen. The phone call. The contract. The signatures. Cold. Sharp. Unmistakable. My professor had been right. They had left their grammatical mistakes. And I had caught everyone. Now my weapon was loaded. But a weapon means nothing without the right battlefield. Going through official channels, the Inspector General, the JAG office, would bury the truth under years of red tape. My father's network would strangle it before it ever saw daylight. I needed a stage. So I built one. I compiled the most damning evidence. The audio of David's call, my father's digital signature, Eli's network logs. I packaged it into a single encrypted file and sent it to one man I knew valued honor above loyalty, General Shepard. The message was short. "General, the honor of the army is at risk." Then a nothing. For 3 days, silence. I began to wonder if I'd overplayed my hand. On the 4th morning, an order appeared in my inbox. "Captain Morgan, you are to attend the annual awards ceremony at the Pentagon." No explanation. None needed. Shepard wasn't just acknowledging my message. He was arranging the stage. The same ceremony where my father was set to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award was about to become something else entirely. Not his coronation. His tribunal. And I would be the star witness. I walked back into the same auditorium that had once been the stage for my greatest humiliation. The same pomp, the same sea of dark blue uniforms and polished brass. Only this time, I wasn't the girl trying to disappear in the crowd. This time, I was the woman they'd never be able to forget. I walked to my assigned seat with my spine straight and my gaze unshakable. A deep, icy calm settled over me, the quiet eye of the storm I had set in motion. From where I sat, I could see them in the VIP section. My father, regal, composed, shaking hands, basking in admiration. My brother David at his side, smiling broadly, soaking in the reflected glory. They had no idea the pawn they discarded was about to topple the kings. The ceremony moved along, all pomp and ceremony. Commendations were read, medals awarded. Then it was time. The announcer spoke my father's name, reciting his storied career. The room erupted in a standing ovation as he strode to the stage and accepted his award. General Shepard stepped to the podium for the closing remarks. At first, he praised my father's decades of service. But then his voice shifted, edged with steel. "Before we conclude," he said, "there is one more matter of honor to address, an issue of security and integrity that affects us all." A ripple of unease swept through the audience. Shepard turned toward the massive presentation screen behind him. "There was a security breach in Bosnia," he continued, "compromising a sensitive mission and injuring a U.S. Army captain." The screen lit up with the network diagram Eli had reconstructed, showing a direct, unauthorized access port originating from an Aegis logistics server. "This breach," Shepard said, voice cold and deliberate, was deliberately covered up to protect a lucrative contract. The display shifted to the contract addendum. He zoomed in on the digital signature. "General William Morgan." Gasps cut through the room. Cameras projected my father's face onto the screen, his complexion drained, his confident smile gone, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. Shepard wasn't finished. He gave a signal to the tech booth. And then my brother's voice filled the auditorium, crisp and damning. "My father has done his part. Now it's your turn. Make sure the incident is convincing enough to shut her up permanently." Silence crashed down over the crowd. Heavy, absolute. Every eye turned toward my father and brother, both frozen like statues in a nightmare. I rose and walked toward the stage, exactly as Shepard had told me to. Standing beside him, I looked down at my family. David's face twisted in panic. He tried to rise, tried to speak, but the words died in his throat as two military police officers appeared at his side, silent and immovable. Then my gaze met my father's. For the first time in my 36 years, I didn't see anger or disappointment or contempt. I saw fear, the raw, unmasked terror of a dethroned king. Shepard said nothing more. He simply turned to me, giving a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture heavy with respect. I returned it in silence, then walked away from the podium. Past the whispers, past the chaos, past the wreckage of the House of Morgan. I didn't look back. In the days that followed, official proceedings blurred together. I gave my testimony to the Inspector General's investigators, calm, precise, unshaken. The evidence Eli and I had gathered was airtight. Once Shepard pointed the system toward the truth, it moved with relentless efficiency. The name Morgan, once a banner of honor, was now whispered in tones of disbelief and shame. Relief washed through me. The crushing weight finally lifted, but beneath it was an exhaustion that lived in my bones. The war was over, but the battlefield had been my own life, and the casualties were my family. I crossed paths with David one last time. I was leaving the investigator's office when two stone-faced MPs escorted him down the hall in handcuffs, his uniform stripped of insignia. His face was pale with fear, but when his eyes found mine, it contorted into pure venom. "Are you happy now, Claire?" he growled, voice low and ragged. The MPs tightened their grip on his arms. I met his gaze, my voice steady. "I'm not happy, David, but I am free." They led him away, and I walked out into the winter air, the storm finally behind me. "You destroyed this family. All of it. It was always you, wasn't it? Just a jealous, selfish little nothing who couldn't stand to see me succeed." Once, those words from my brother would have sliced through me like glass. Now, they hit like pebbles against a fortress wall. They fell harmlessly away. I looked at David, my brother in blood only, and felt nothing but a cold, hollow pity. No, David, I said evenly. I didn't destroy our family. I just told the truth. You and Father did the rest. I turned and walked away. I didn't glance back as his voice rose, ragged with fury, fading into the distance. My father wasn't arrested immediately. His rank and decades of service bought him a sliver of procedural courtesy. But his career was finished. His reputation was shattered. His legacy reduced to ash. He asked to see me. I agreed, not for him, but to close the chapter for myself. We met in a quiet coffee shop in Arlington, its wide windows framing a gray winter sky. He looked smaller somehow. The steel had crumbled, leaving a man who seemed to have aged 10 years in a single week. His hands trembled as he stirred his coffee. He didn't apologize. He didn't admit fault. He barely met my eyes. Instead, he slid a small black velvet box across the table. "Claire," he rasped, voice rough and uneven, "this is my West Point ring. I want you to have it." Finally, he looked at me, eyes searching. "Let's just forget all of this. We're still family." It was his last play, the final move of a chess game he thought he was still winning. He was offering me the symbol of the legacy he'd spent years denying me, thinking it would buy my silence, my forgiveness. He still didn't understand. He thought the prize I'd always wanted was his ring, his approval, his world. He never realized the only thing I'd ever wanted was a father. I pushed the box gently back toward him. "I don't need it, General," I said. The formal title felt strange and liberating in equal measure. Honor isn't in gold. It's in our actions. And your actions and David's nearly got me killed. I rose, my chair scraping softly on the floor. "I hope one day you understand that," I told him quietly. "But I can't wait for that day. From now on, I'm living my own life. I wish you luck, sir." Then I walked out into the cold Virginia air, never looking back. Relief washed over me so strongly it almost took my legs out from under me. But grief followed close behind, the ache of losing the phantom limb of a family I no longer had. I had lost a father. I had lost a brother. But I had found myself. In the aftermath, the fall of the Morgan name was swift. Tribunals. Dishonorable discharges. Prison sentences. My father's name stripped from plaques and buildings. His portraits removed from places of honor. I felt no joy, only a deep, still peace. The chains of expectation and disappointment that had bound me for decades had rusted away. I was free. I chose to leave the knife edge of field operations. On General Shepard's advice, I took a teaching post at the U.S. Army Military Police School in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, a place of rolling green hills and eager young soldiers. A world away from Washington's sharp edges and Bosnia's ghosts. They tasked me with building a new program, strategic intercultural engagement. My own corner of the Army, built on empathy. On my first day, I walked to my new office. On the door was a polished brass plaque. It didn't bear my name. It read simply, "The Whisper Room." A quiet gift from Eli. I stood there for a long moment, a real smile spreading across my face for the first time in years. My legacy wouldn't be a codename whispered in intelligence shadows. It would be a classroom where no young soldier would ever be told their intellect was a weakness, or that a weapon without bullets was useless. In my first class, I didn't start with grammar drills or vocabulary lists. I told them a story, an anonymous, altered account of a mission that nearly failed over a single misunderstood cultural gesture. I taught them to listen not just to words, but to silences, to see the stories hiding in someone's eyes. When the lesson ended, a young female specialist lingered. Her eyes were bright, her voice low but steady. "Captain," she said, "thank you. No one's ever told us empathy could be a tactic." In her expression, I saw the spark of understanding. And I knew I had found my purpose. I hadn't just fought and won my war, I was arming a new generation with weapons that could build bridges instead of just destroy enemies. My healing began there, in the quiet woods of Missouri, carried by the words my mother once read to me from Isaiah. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you." A year later, a small package arrived at my office. No return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. My aunt's elegant, looping script. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation. Just a single faded photograph. It was me, around 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the worn carpet of our old house at Fort Carson, completely absorbed in the French dictionary my mother had given me, my face lit with focus and quiet joy. I turned it over. On the back, in my aunt's hand, were a few simple words. "Your father asked me to send this to you. He didn't say anything else, only that this is how he wants to remember you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't absolution. But it was acknowledgement. A message sent indirectly, admitting that the little girl with her nose in a book had, in her own way, won. That the path he had once scorned, mocked, and dismissed had carried a strength he had never understood. I took a thumbtack and pinned the photo to the corkboard beside the polished brass plaque reading the Whisper Room. 2 legacies, side by side. I studied the face of that girl, and for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of her isolation. I felt pride. My healing hadn't come from forgiving them. It had come from forgiving myself, for ever believing I wasn't enough.